toolkit. At least why I got into computer science was to make video games. I ended up not doing that, but it's fun. And so you can go download this. This is on GitHub. You can go to flutterdev/game, and our main website's at Flutter Dev, so all these links will be available there. And I'll make sure to share the slide deck with everyone afterwards. But the Casual Games Toolkit lets you, it has the bare bones for a game, and so you get started actually making the interesting part and not really like, how do you do the basic stuff like draw calls and stuff like that. The other one too, this is more like if you have your software engineering series, you can get started with a news toolkit, which is an actual application. You go plug in your own data, your own Google Cloud, your content and such, and then you go edit to whatever you need. So while this is a news toolkit, you could also see this can be pivoted pretty quickly to a blog or whatever you want. So we have these sample apps that are very large and verbose, like 10,000 lines of code with tests, front end code, and shows you how to do all of this. And jumping in, so again, fast, I'm gonna go through this. So the way Flutter works, you might be asking is, how do we not compromise on it? Is generally you write your code, that's the top layer. It's a very layered design we say here. So at any point you can go ahead, if you don't like some part of Flutter, it's open source, you can go and rewrite it. So your code will be in Dart. Our framework, the SDK, which is sort of how we interpret your Dart code, is also in Dart. So if you actually don't want to write Dart code and you want to write your own code, you can go rewrite it all in Kotlin, Java, Python. People have done this. They've taken the top part of Flutter and ripped it off. Not really, they just tear it off and put in their own, which is really one of the nice parts about a layered design. I would also say this is important for like software engineering and architecture, is learn how to layer and separate all your components because it's easy to refactor. With that said, then our engine is actually, it's just like a game engine, a rendering engine. It figures out how to take some human idea of a call, like a math call, and it converts it to what should the screen show, what pixels need to be drawn right now. And it works very close to what the hardware is, but it isn't. And then the final level is that embedder API we were talking about. So it implements for each platform. Android, iOS, each has its own embedder. So how do you take these generic rendering pixel calls and convert it to whatever the local one is, which every graphics card is. And then you have the last layer, which is the hardware. We don't really control that part. You can't rip that part out. But if you're building your own hardware, you can change that. So there's quite a few people who have used it. I don't know. It looks like no video today. Tencent, correct me if I'm wrong, either they wrote TikTok or they wrote Byte or Alibaba. It's one of the two. But they write all their non-major app major app home screens are all in Flutter, which is really nice. There's also a lot of stories about different apps. And we're gonna just skip into going into demos. And so with that, if you have questions, feel free, tinyurl.com/flutterqa. I'm gonna jump over to Dartpad, which Dartpad, any of you can get started. So one of the issues I always had with learning mobile apps and web apps is you have to download stuff to your computer, and it's such a pain. With this, if you go to dartpad.dev, you will be able to run and write Flutter code today. So I see a lot of computers. You're more than welcome to get started here. You can see actually what Flutter code is today. We're not going to go through too much, but I'll show a few sample apps. Our first one, whenever you get started with Flutter, and by getting started, there's a bit of a pain in that you need to have a native setup. So you can't build a Flutter app without the native components. So if you want to start with building an Android app in Flutter, you get the Android Studio. If you want to do iOS apps, you can get Xcode. If you're going to do web, you need to have some browser, which you likely got this. So this is our demo app. This is the counter app. We call this one's pretty great because all you do is you come here, you click the plus button, and then the number goes up. 1, 2, 3. And the hardest thing in computer science is state management. So this shows you a very small demo of how you can have a button change the state of your app. So in this case, increment it. And all it's doing is you can see this is very much a Google Material looking app, relatively. But the part of it that's interesting is it says set state here, which is a very lightweight version of how Flutter handles state management. It'll go ahead and redraw your UI whenever the state has changed, if it detects the widget is depending on that state. So, and with Flutter, you don't have to build just Material apps. There's somewhat of a bias of everyone will use Material because it's what our code labs use. But you can also do Cupertino, which is the iOS format. You can build your own design languages. There's a lot of cool ones. People in the open source community have built, I think Microsoft's Fluent Design is what they call the Windows 10 look. You can just get that all for free. It's all open source. People have been building it. And if you have your own custom, really cool design, like if you build something in Figma, you want to implement it, you can go ahead and do that as well. But for the most part, we're going to kind of skip that because this is surface level. We're just going to talk more about the high level. So with that, that's state management, which I find that much easier than some of the web solutions out there, but I haven't played with web in a year or two. We also, going back to the game one, this is why I got into the job, is you can play, there's this demo, it's called pad racing. And it might take a while to run, actually. I think it downloads a lot. We'll see if it runs. But you should, oh, error compiling to JavaScript. We break something? We'll skip it. That one's a fun one though, because it shows you how to build your own games in Flutter, but if needed, you can just download. And again, I'm doing this all in the web browser, so you don't need anything to get started. This is just a basic IDE if you want to play around it and see if Flutter is the right thing for your project. This one's like a Firebase app, so you can say hello, it talks to the real world, and will show you live messages people have been sending, which is pretty nice. It only lets you say hello, so because who knows what input it could be. So again, a lot of cool demos for what you can use Flutter for. There's a lot of integrations with any Google tooling. So if you're using Google Cloud, that's very popular. There's also AWS as well. AWS has a lot of packages and support for Flutter. You would be surprised the number of libraries, Stripe, anything you can imagine. And then probably the last one I'll show today is the Go Router one, which it's pretty much a full app. We're gonna see, oh, you know, I wonder if I didn't load the right page. It wouldn't be a live demo if nothing broke. This is why I shouldn't use Dartpad. It's because if I had it on my computer, it would probably work. No, I'm still getting compiling to JavaScript. So that's most of what Flutter is. I recommend just going into the docs. Flutter.dev has a very much code lab. Today's just like a high level overview of it. With that said, do we want to just jump into Q&A? Oh yeah.
You want to bring up the slide again? You can give people a few minutes to question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're welcome to ask anything about Flutter. That's just very quick.
Yeah.
I recommend playing around with it. Yeah, so what are the categories for questions? You can ask anything about Flutter, Google, college life. Are there live questions?
Huh?
Are there live questions?
If anyone has questions you want to ask right now, you can raise your hand.
You want to pass the mic or?
Yeah.
Okay. Or okay. I meant for them. Okay. 2 to 3. I think for the team, well, there's 2 aspects. I would say from the technical side, we let Material 2 to 3 take too long to deprecate everything because you could still use Material 2 today. And so I think it's been 2 years since we've said Material 2 was deprecated, and we never moved people off. So that would probably be the big one for me. I mean, the thing we're learning is how to the hardest part isn't moving the larger ecosystem, but how to move Google off of it, which is a bit of a silly question, but we're learning how to automate Google to, in the open source way, you can say Flutter fix, and it'll tell you how to use everything the Material 3 way. But inside of Google, that's not how it works. And so we've recently started writing the tools to let us do that. And so hopefully in the future, we won't have deprecated fields and ways of doing things just because Google still uses Material 2 internally. So that's the good thing we learned. That's from the very technical side point. The other part is from the design point of view. I think it's interesting. It's a big change how you can personalize Material 3. There's a lot more code generation to it as well, which I think will be good for any new design framework. For those of you that aren't familiar, Google will say here, you can say like, I forget what the exact word is, so feel free to correct me. But there is the idea of like primary colors, tertiary colors, and then you just inject them and set tokens for creating it, and then all your code is generated to map based off of like these JSON files that they give, which is an interesting way of like supporting.
I can share some questions from the Google form. So one of the questions we have is, what are people's biggest complaint about Flutter? Any insight on that?
The biggest complaint, I mean, I'm biased, so ideally you come with the complaints and I address them. The biggest ones that people usually talk about, the first one is you'll take a performance hit with Flutter. That's true of any cross-platform solution. Like the benefit is you're going to be more productive as an engineer and you have to weigh the trade-offs of that. Some of the performance comparisons though are a bit outdated now. One of our biggest complaints was iOS was really slow for Flutter. And that was true, but we recently rewrote our rendering engine into this one called Impeller, which deals with runtime jank. And so now we build we pre-cache your shaders in such a build time. So as a developer on your machine, we'll build it, and then users don't have to build your shaders. And so iOS is actually, I think, our fastest platform at the moment. So for people that still complain about iOS performance, I recommend just getting the latest version of Flutter and redeploying your app because you get all the performance benefits for free. Other than that, there's still some nuance to performance issues because every app is different. Like you want to, we could do a lot more on the tooling side to expose why your app's slow. And a lot of other great tooling like Android and iOS have this built in by default. But like when you go to launch the app, that is not the time to decide to connect to Firebase or Google Cloud, right? Wait until you've drawn a pixel to the screen before you do that. So there's small things like that we definitely want to work on for the Flutter tool telling you how to do it. So that's performance is a big complaint. And especially if you try Flutter Web, like the dartpad.dev is not like what we like to show because it's the slowest version, but also it's just super convenient for me to pull up the Chrome browser and like say run these Flutter apps. Usually it works. Last year it works. So that's number one. The second complaint I would say is people are adverse. Not everyone gets this, but are adverse to learning Dart, which is a new programming language. Like you might get frustrated. You spend like 10 weeks learning Python or Java as your intro CS course. And you're like, wow, this framework is useless to me. But I would say languages, once you learn one, you will be able to swap pretty quickly. So I find it to be a weird friction, but we do see it as the biggest complaint to people adopting Flutter. That's why I say at the start, like you can rewrite Flutter to like Kotlin or Python. People have done that as like one-off projects. So,
all right, a few more questions. What are some of the best resources you think for learning Dart and Flutter?
I'm biased. The Flutter YouTube channel is pretty great. I like video content, but Flutter Dev also has a link called Code Labs, which they have usually a solution you're trying to do. So they'll say like how to build your first stateful Flutter app or how to write shaders, things like that. They'll have a very targeted workflow. And so it's like a tutorial class that you spend maybe an hour going through. They'll give you like code samples, expand the code, explain everything to you, which is super nice. And there's often a YouTube video attached to this code lab. So those are my favorite spots. The community is also really big. There's a lot of community YouTube videos. So two different forums depending on which way you like.
Awesome. Let's see. What does your typical day at work look like at Google on the Flutter team?
Yeah, so I mean, to expand on this, I work on Flutter's release team. So I spend a lot of time thinking strategically about like 6-month goals, which I would say a lot of our team does. So I do less feature work, which means I don't really pick up bugs and and work on things you'll see on GitHub. You'll see me on GitHub, but it's more of helping people make sure they're not breaking things, API changes. So for me personally, it's more of what am I doing week to week? And so usually Monday is like getting my team organized, figuring out what we need to do for the week. And then like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I get to write a bunch of code. And then Friday, planning out what we're going to do for the next week, which is also kind of vague, I know. But it changes depending on the time of year as well. As we're getting to the end of the year, you do more writing design.
Awesome. Let's see. Did you specifically choose to join the Flutter team at Google? And if so, what made you pick Flutter?
Yeah. So when I was at UC Santa Cruz, my last 2 quarters, I was doing the software engineering capstone project course.
115 ABC, if it's the same now.
Probably it was 115 through 17 back then.
Okay.
And so we decided to do a Flutter app because we had the problem of like half the team had Androids, half the team had iOS, iPhones, and it was just an easy way. And Flutter had just released in January. I remember us trying to convince Professor Julig that we should be allowed to use it. He was very hesitant, and we said yes. And we had a good time. We were able to do a lot. Our app was a bit dumb because all of us just wanted to go out sailing at the harbor. And so every week we got to go out sailing as part of our homework. And so we built like an app that taught you how to sail. And if you ever think about like being taught how to sail with your phone out over the ocean, it's not practical. And luckily Julig never took us up on our offer to go try the app. So it was just a random compass for him. And so with that, I really liked it. It was pretty cool. It was all open source and I interacted with the team. And I went out to like I/O and got to meet the team that year. And then I joined Google and I did this program. It's called Early Career Immersion now. So I recommend it if you're looking at ones. I don't know if the roles are open, but it's a pretty cool program in that you spend your first 2 months with a bunch of other new grads. You get like a cohort of 30 of you. They do a bunch of like classroom style teaching in these 2 months and like project-based learning where you're just stuck with other new grads. Not really stuck, but you get a whole bunch of new friends. And then you get 2 4-month rotations on teams. So my first one was on the Flutter team and they just converted me early. But you get like a bunch of choices on teams you get to do. You get to interview them on Google, meet with them, figure out if it's a team you would actually like. And that's true for both. So that's the program I just stayed with Flutter. That's it.
Awesome. Next question is, do a lot of Google internal apps use Flutter?
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of generally, that's one of the things we've noticed is any internal app, not just Google, but other enterprises that use Flutter, also all their internal apps are in Flutter just because it's so easy. The hard ones that we tend not to see too much adoption for is when your home screen, people are very sensitive to latency and they don't want like the 50 millisecond latency hit to their like home screen. And even those, you'll see the other screens are written in Flutter.
Do you build anything on Flutter outside of work? I know you did before in 115A, but what about now? Do you have any personal projects going on?
I'm writing a game, Flutter. It's not going as fast as I would like, but that's just my own blocker is me. I get stuck with, being familiar with Flutter. I go and then try and contribute pull requests to bug fixes I find while building the game. And so I spend less time writing my game, more time just fixing products and frameworks. Which the game is pretty nice. It's a top-down 2D game. It's supposed to be like an isometric view where you fly planes and then try to land them, but then keep getting more planes. So it's a very simple game.
That's very cool. When you were at UCSC, what kind of campus involvement did you participate in? Any clubs or organizations? If you can remember
there is something I don't remember. I don't remember if this was a club back then. I remember doing stuff. We had something for the software engineering series. That was like a club side piece where people would help each other outside. And I did that my last year, which was nice. For me, I worked part-time throughout college to pay for it, so I didn't get too much free time, so I didn't have too much time for club.
Does anyone have some open questions they want to ask? If you do, you can just feel free to raise your hands. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, that's a good question. It always depends. I mean, a good way to start is thinking about the high-level problem you're solving. I would say it also helps too if you're going to write tests for it, because usually the hardest part I find when you go from college to actual work experience, depending on what job you do, some companies don't care about that. They'll do manual QA, but automated testing is really important because then you don't have to go back and check if work was right, ideally. So if you're writing automated tests, you'll usually build out a design that works pretty well where you have small reusable components because you don't want to like test the whole app, right? You're like, I want to test my button. When I click it, it changes the number, right? And so that's like a good idea of a component. And so there's a few like thoughts on it. I think Robert C. Martin has really good books on it, like Clean Architecture and Clean Code, that will like expand on it. But I think just solving the smallest problem you can is pretty good, and not having a large API surface. But it depends. I recommend just like drawing out on a piece of paper how things will talk. Like, oh, I have this service and it's a REST API. So this is my REST API and it talks to this state file, and then this state file will talk to my UI code, and then you start to see how the pieces are. It depends. Yeah. There's I think it's called. It depends which way you do it. Like model view controller is like a popular paradigm where you separate it all out. Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. So when I started out, I was using Provider. At this point, I just like use inherited widget, which is just what everything uses under the hood. But that's like I've just been on the team for a really long time. So uh, yeah, it depends. The community has really a lot of solutions to it that I recommend checking out. Like whatever you prefer. The Provider is pretty great. I just recommend staying away from streams if you're gonna do it. Streams are a pain. Streams. Just don't touch streams. Convert everything to list. Unless you're touching hardware, just never make a stream in your life.
All right, I've got another question from the Q&A. What's your favorite app that you use daily that uses Flutter?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me look at my phone real quick. What do I have? So GPay uses Flutter, but it's not my favorite app. It's just practically you need to send money.
Like Google Pay?
Yeah, Google Pay. That is a good question. I mean, all of my apps, I use that for work. I use Flutter. They're not really, I get paid to use them. I'm trying to see. Actually, I don't have many. I like my game I'm making, but I don't have it on my phone. I'm making it as like a little Windows app, desktop.
Do you know of any mobile apps that use Flutter that are like fairly popular?
So if you ever use Alibaba or PUBG, the PUBG UI is all in Flutter. I don't know if anyone plays PUBG. It's apparently really good. And so all the PUBG mobile UIs, which is cool.
That is cool.
But Alibaba, someone probably has a list. They probably have it on the slides. Yeah. No, that's one nuance. We've gotten better at it. Ideally, we wanted it to do well at websites, but like the web is a hard space. Like Flutter, the reason why web is hard is to understand it. You have to think about why Flutter was created. Flutter was a bunch of people from the Chrome team who were like, how can we make the web like 100 times faster after 20 years of like constant HTML and JavaScript, RFCs, and constantly you have Apple wants to do it this way, Microsoft, Mozilla, and like the browsers do it, and now it becomes the law for what the standard is, and we have to go retroactively do it. And the API for the web is like just your computer at this point, which is this ridiculous way of like, how do you speed up the DOM in the web? So the people from Chrome decided like, let's just cut out 90% of what we don't need and all the jank and like things that take a lot of bulk that we don't really need. Because with Chrome, the rule is you can't break rendering for like a website that was built in 2000. But with Flutter, the rule is, can we do that? And so we were able to be much faster. The issue is the way Flutter does things just won't work well on the web unless you're doing, the big nuance there is what are the difference between a website and a web app. So if you're gonna build a blog and things that are very text heavy and should feel really nice and smooth with how people interact with text, I recommend just go and write HTML, right? But if you're gonna build an app, something that is very unique and that you're drawing experiences like games, or you don't really care about performance on the web, then Flutter Web is fine. Like there's a few like people in production that ship Flutter Web apps, but they're like, yeah, 1% of our user base is the web. Like one thing I'm thinking of is Google Classroom, where there's not much complicated stuff going in, and they get the iOS and Android apps for free, and then the web app is also free, which is super cool to them. And there's not much to show on like a classroom page. Like, I haven't used it in a while, but from the pictures, there's like 3 buttons to click. Yeah, it's like, here's this test we do. Yeah. But yeah, it depends what you're trying to do though. Generally, I would steer people, if you want to learn web, that's great. Like, and generally most people want to do websites, so just go learn like a web technology. Flutter's not really trying to do web, although we offer it. Any follow-ups on
Do you have any other open questions? All right, I can take a few more from the Q&A responses. Did you notice any skills from your game development experience that translated into software engineering in general?
So this is really biased. I work on the Flutter team, so we deal with rendering problems. Game development is just rendering problems. So there's a lot of overlap. Like I remember taking courses at university that I thought would be interesting, like shaders. I don't remember if that's the name. Don't quote me. But there's like some web shaders course, which was fun. And so like that's kind of what I do day to day is write shader code. And a lot of these like linear algebra problems, which I would say most people you ask, they're not going to have this experience. This is just like randomly like I messed up and got stuck with this. So but other than that, like random skills, I would just say like learning like you have a problem, debugging through it is just going to carry through whatever. Definitely.
Did you have any job experience prior to Google internships, anything like that?
No, that's a good question. I worked part-time. So I had a university, I had an internship when I started at UC Santa Cruz-ish, and then I converted to part-time in there. It was at a small tech company. It was the local Santa Cruz place. So I worked there like 20 hours a week throughout all of college. And, you know, Google offered me a job at the end, and they paid more than the small tech company. So I just went there.
Awesome.
But I mean, for other people, if you're interested, the Santa Cruz Tech Meetup, I think is still around, and I recommend checking it out. There's a lot of local companies hiring.
Has AI affected your job at all since like LLMs have gotten very big in the past few years?
That's a good question. Yes, annoyingly. But it's not like a I don't have much to say there other than I know more buzzwords than I should. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good questions, especially at the Flutter level. We think of how can you write frameworks and languages that work well with LLMs and play nice? And what work can we do? Like, can we pipe the LLM output into like our language analyzers, make sure the codes make sense, make it performant, and then have it send back and like go through constant iteration to figure out what's valid code. So those are interesting opportunities. AI-wise, I mean, like there's basic, you can ask ChatGPT to like write like how to say congrats to someone. Okay, that's pretty useful. Other than that, I don't really use ChatGPT or Bard too much. In my like, I draw pixels, so I'm a bad person to ask. Generally, you want to be in milliseconds, and LLMs take like 5-10 seconds at least.
All right. Do you have any other open questions?
Yeah. Impeller on Android. So Impeller was the new rendering engine. We targeted iOS first because iOS was like the biggest performance complaint we had. And so this next year, I mean, there's a few things. I joked with Impeller from last year's talk. But I would say Impeller for Android is hopeful. What are other ones? I mean, constantly improving quality and performance. So while iOS is super fast still, we're going to continue to make it faster. And so with the next stable, we'll do that. But it's a good question. I mean, we're asking ourselves that too. How much of Google wants AI stuff? You know, I expect it'll just be polishing most of what the framework is. Pretty much everything's out there that we need to do. Addressing top GitHub issues. There's something you want. It's all open source for the issue tracking, so you just go thumbs it up.
Any other open questions?
They also don't have to be about Flutter.
Yeah, it can be about
with
Flutter, license often here. Casey is personal. Just kidding.
Yes, if you can find something.
A new show.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird. It's nice not having homework. So, I mean, like for me, it's generally a 6-hour day, which is nice. I found it much easier to disconnect, but I know it's a big jump going from new grad to working full time. For me, it was nice to have like, here's my fixed routine every day. And I go and I write code for these problems. And there's people to support you. Like at school, it's like you get in trouble if you cheat on people or use the same code, Stack Overflow, right? But like work, no one cares. So it makes it much more streamlined and easier. But some people, it can be difficult though, knowing how to like work with like, instead of as a university student, it's very much yourself, which is kind of a bummer. There's a few courses, but you'll do like maybe you have a 3 or 4 person group, right? And it's much smaller. Like it's still you as yourself, and you get your grade, right? It's not your group's grade. But when you go to work, it's like, how do you make your team successful? And like, how do you work with your team? How do you work with all these different people that now in a 10-week course, maybe you don't deal with this person for long, so it's okay. But now you deal with this person for like 4 years. They just become a personality. So there's a lot more of these interpersonal things that I think are interesting. But I think for me, it also helped if you do like internships, you're probably fine, like understanding how people work. Like they go home and they don't think about work. That's good.
I have a question for you actually. So
Yeah.
at Google, do they use any sort of like Scrum or Agile methodologies in their teams, or is it something a little bit different?
Generally, no, but it depends. Some teams do it. Every team has its own management style. So there's like what 150,000 Googlers. Everyone's a bit nuanced in how every team's going to do it. So my team personally, we're actually like it's kind of bad, but like this quarter we're going to try to do agile, but it's mostly just making sure people don't overcommit because I'm like a team lead, so I'm just trying to help my team out. One of the new grads thing is accept every bug that people might think is important, and they'll accept them. And they have like 1,000 bugs, right? So one of the things is like we'll do agile, so you can't have more than I don't know if I'm doing it right, but like you can't have more than 50 points on you for that quarter. Otherwise, you just have to declare bankruptcy. So we were going to try that. Other teams do it. Google is very much for the software engineering culture. It's an IC based format. So what that means is IC is short for independent contributor. So you yourself need to figure out what works best for you. And then you kind of like, it's very bottom up in that you figure out what the problems are that you can fix, and then you surface it up and like try to like let your manager know you get approval. And sometimes you go above that and get the whole team to approve it. But you'll like say, I'm going to solve these problems, and then you just go solve them. It's less of like, how do you work as a team?
Awesome.
But again, there's a lot of us. So this is just my take on it.
How big are teams generally at Google? Does it vary a lot?
Yeah. So like my team is 5 people for what I lead, but like the Flutter team's 40 people overall, and there's like 10 teams. So we average about 5 people, which is small. Some teams I've seen like 20 person. No, even 40 person. So it depends. It's not like I can't tell you Cloud does it this way. Someone it's just there's a person that accidentally ended up with so many rounds. So and it's just a random information.
Right. Let's see here. Do you have to pay to use Flutter at all? And if it's free, why and how do you guys make it free?
So no, you don't have to pay to use Flutter. It's open source and free. So go to GitHub, download it. Dartpad.dev is free. There's no membership for that. Any way you get Flutter, someone's trying to charge you for Flutter, you probably went on their website. Again, it's just flutter.dev. So with that said, you can. The only thing that we do mention for payments is there's 3 things I'll break it down to. There's consultancies. I don't think students really care about consultants, but for enterprises and large companies, like if you go to work and your company's new to trying out Flutter, they might hire a consultant to help you do a lot of one-on-one stuff. The second way is you might not necessarily pay, but you'll add ads to your app because you want money from people just looking at your app, which is good. And then the last one is you might use like a cloud provider, and so you'll pay for like you just put a credit card on file. I think students get a free service for AWS, GCP. Please don't pay for Flutter.
Okay, let's see. Does anyone else have any open questions? Yeah, what's up?
That's a good question. I mean, generally, I'd like to do like pick up games of sports randomly, so basketball, pickleball, beach tennis, whatever the season calls for. So I'll do that, and I'm pretty big into fitness. I've been on vacation the whole summer, so I'm not there right now. It was a long vacation. But yeah, like sailing, like I mentioned, like that was my big thing in college. I don't live as close to the water as I would like. One day I'd like to get a boat, my own boat. But yeah, I try to get out. Like I think this is hinting at like I just don't personally try to write code in my free time. Like the most I did was there was this occasionally I think when you learn how to write code, you'll try to solve your own problem. So I try to get this thing called global entry. And so I would constantly have this script that would scrape the government's website and then like enter my info as soon as an appointment put up and then like, give me an earlier time slot. Because it was like 9 months out to get this appointment, get through TSC pre-check. And that's like the last time. That was like 3 years ago when I wrote this script. I don't often write code. I was just frustrated at the idea. oh, I'm gonna have to do this. This is a pain. People check it at midnight every day. Yeah. So yeah, it depends though. Like I feel like I'm bad too. I tend to pick up hobbies and lack focus for a few months. I just do that. So
Mhm.
then you find a new one and waste more money. So,
Oh, yeah. Got another question from the Google form here. So as a team lead, do you have any tips for building connections with a new team, especially if it's a smaller group?
yeah, I mean, I just recommend. It depends on the format, and like again, people are different, so your mileage may vary. I recommend just at least meeting with everyone face to face. Like if that just means getting on a video chat, that's good. That's the first step, and then figuring out who might be someone that's good at supporting you is like the bigger trick. But once you do that, I recommend regularly meeting with them face to face. That's a good way of building connection. Like by default, your manager and your tech lead should help you out with this by setting it up for you. But like I know the other people who aren't necessarily in leadership roles, it's a bit weirder. But I recommend that's a good step. And then depending on how large the company is, like so if you end up at Google or any other big tech company, just go randomly set up chats with people. Like we usually call them coffee chats across the company. You can learn how their teams do things, ping people, voice your frustrations. I don't care. If it's a smaller company, that's also why there's like the Santa Cruz Tech Meetup. Like there's get-togethers with because when I was working in college, it was a 10-person, so I didn't want to go like tell the guy down the hall was mad at my manager, right? So you would just go to the tech meetups and like tell other people. So that's a good way. But again, it varies. People are hard. I think we have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
I mean, it depends. Usually, at the highest level, it is encouraged. Depending if your team, if it's like you're at the end of your team and like you're kind of done with work, it's probably fine. Google has this policy for those of you that don't know. So after a year, you can go find a new team. That's definitely encouraged because ideally, what Google wants to do at the macro level is retain all employees, which is good because then you will have learned how Google does things. Then you just go move to another team, which is cool. So you might go from the Fitbit team to Google Cloud or vice versa, wherever you want, which is a cool perk. What's more common, I find, is you'll swap within your team. Like you might join a team. Like once you find a team you like I like Flutter team, I'll move between all these different things and work on whatever is most important at that time. So I wear a bunch of different hats, which is much more encouraged of you naturally transition into whatever is the most interesting.
Awesome. All right, do we have any other open questions? I guess you're in first.
Yeah, oh, that's a good question. I mean, I didn't try to do this. I guess eventually, if you stay on the same team long enough, you become a lead. So that's the worry. If you don't want to be a lead, you can just hop every few years. For me, the skills I learned though doing it, again, I thought it would be like a cool job of like, oh, I help set the technical direction for my team. It's all software engineers, and so like thinking about high level architecture and how can we optimize and think long term for our success for the code we're gonna write today to day. Which most of it actually just becomes like people things. Like people get burnt out. How do you help this person that is a new grad figure out like just work 9 to 5, don't check your email more than like twice a day, things like that. And it's just much more of the mundane, which I didn't expect, which makes it a bit easier because there's not much thought I put into it. But I do feel more like a therapist than a than a software engineer.
Good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. A good question. Other books. I mean, so if you're not aware, Martin C. Martin or Robert C. Martin. There we go. Sorry, the last name. No, you're good. The last name and first name I mixed up. You. So he has a really good software engineering series. I recommend getting those. Like he has quite a few other ones, but those I would say like are pretty good reading, and I think they're at the library. Like you don't. I wouldn't encourage to buy books. Just go. To the library. You already paid a lot to be here. So with that said, other books. Oh, that's a good question. I feel like for software engineering, one of the things to note is books go out of date real quick. So you want timeless books, which Robert C. Martin kind of does. Other timeless books, I think there's an essay called A Man Month. I don't know if that's the right one. But personal books, I mean, I recommend Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because people are going to unreasonably refer to that. And so you may as well at least have watched the movie before you get too far in this field. But let me see. No, that's a good question. Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. I have nothing to put. Yeah, no, the one I was thinking of is the Mythical Man Month, and it goes over like how to work on things, and it's targeted more towards like tech, but it's just like time estimates are hard. You're gonna be bad at it. Like I'm bad at it. Everyone's.
Okay. Does anyone else have any lab questions? If not, we can go over a few more of the Google form questions, and then we'll move on to our feedback form and our raffle, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we get to it. But for now, any lab questions?
Also, if you want like personal career advice and such, you're always more than welcome to reach out to me. My email, they'll share it.
We can share, yeah.
My name's pretty easy to find. So.
Okay, so a question from the forum. Can you explain Google's 20% time and what do you do for your 20% time?
Yeah, so Google has this program where generally, and it's pretty popular, but 20% of your time you can go do whatever and you don't need approval for this. It's kind of changed over time. It's a little bit stricter now in that you should get approval from your manager. Like you shouldn't be about to be fired and then like trying to also do random work for the team, right? So generally you have to get a formal sign off now, which is kind of weird to most people. Back in the day, like classic Google, they didn't have like, I don't know, finance people. You didn't have to think about this, but now you have to go tell your manager, I'm going to go work 20% of my time. And what that looks like is often like, I'm going to go work Friday for this team that I'm interested in. And so you just go find whatever is interesting to you. What's often we do on the Flutter team is people will go work on the internal, like the Google owned Flutter apps that are up and coming. People will go spend like their Friday helping them build out that app, which is kind of fun because we get to see how are they using Flutter, what pain points they have. Usually there's a lot of things we can like fix up for them really quickly. And you'll just do that on your Friday, which is pretty fun. But you could do it anywhere. Like I've seen people do it they'll do like full-time, these types of things where they do workshops, come to universities, travel the globe for that. Those are fun. They'll do DevRel, YouTube videos, whatever. Like we've had a lot of people join Flutter because they did 20% time on our team. And they're like, oh yeah, you're just a natural fit. So it's also a good way to feel out if a team is a good fit for you, especially when you're thinking like, you've been on this team for a year, you don't want to be here anymore. Let me go find something new to do.
All right, I've got one more Q&A question, and then I'll open up the floor to any more live questions as the last chance, and we'll move on to the feedback form and raffle. Okay, so how does Google support you as an employee, and even more so as a software engineer? Do you get any like special benefits that you like to divulge?
I mean, they pay me pretty well. I mean, how do they support me other than pay? You know, like they pay roughly top of market is their goal, and there's like whole comp things that I don't know. That's all open. You can go look at it. Other than that, they have quite a few nifty programs to support you. There's a lot of like coaching benefits. So if you're like really stressed, so if you're a new grad and you recently joined, but you don't feel comfortable talking about like these personal issues you're facing, you're like, oh, this isn't what I think work is supposed to be about. Technically, you should be able to talk about it. Usually, most of the things people talk about are personal issues unless the code. After a while, the code isn't the issue. So there's coaching benefits, which are free. And like, you can go like every week to like whoever you want. They have a huge list of specialists who also can count as therapists if you want to convert it into that. But usually they'll coach you like career-wise on whatever you want, which is nice. It gives you like a third person who's like very subjective to the whole situation. They just don't know you well enough, but they'll like let you rant to them and then like help you come figure out what you should do, which is a nice random perk. Other random perks, I mean, food is cool. Supporting me. I mean, it's hard to say that, you know, like they laid off a bunch of people. So I can't think of anything at the top of my head for supporting, you know. They could be cooler than they were at the time. But they'll do random events too. Like usually every few months there's a big like party. So there's like concerts. There's like Google's Halloween parties coming up. Holiday parties are coming up. So I think that's interesting, you know, but like you will find that at probably most. Was there other parts to that question as well?
Just specifically like benefits in regards to software engineering. which
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
covered a bit.
Yeah, and for software engineering, the reason why I went to Google for like new grad is because like one of my worries was I worked at a really small company. I didn't really know how to do things the right way. We just did things to sell and make money. That's whatever the quickest path forward was. For most big tech companies, they'll have huge like learning courses and an emphasis on like I said, 2 months of my time was just spent in like classroom learning situations and group projects, like onboarding to everything Google offers, and not just what Google does, but like generally how to write code, how to build apps, how to write tests, which is super useful, like how to ship things to production, how to like not break production. Those are pretty cool. And those are continuously happening. Like right now, I think like 10% of my time I do like a weekly course with a bunch of other people. We just sit down and like there's a lecturer, but it's very much like group-based learning. So always learning new things, which is nice. There's room. Like if I don't do like these 4 hours of work, it's not like they're gonna go bankrupt. So I know at smaller companies that's a bit more intense.
All right, so we got one more question from the Q&A, and then we're going to move on to the feedback form and raffle. So did you attend the Google Summit conference this week?
No. Well, it depends which one, but I don't think it's the one you're asking.
If whoever asked this question wants to raise their hand and elaborate, they're welcome to. And if anyone else has any short live questions before we move on to the feedback form, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask away.
I would say no. I don't think I attended the one. Was it on campus? No, no. Well, the easy answer, no. Yesterday, today's Monday, right? Yeah, I was at home yesterday, so it wasn't that productive. No, but yeah, there's a lot of good events that Google offers. I recommend trying them out, especially like you might not be interested in front end. I was never interested in front end. I would say I'm also not interested in front end. So I think it's cool to like figure out how to like have the pixels go to the graphics card really fast. You just go to different workshops and summits and figure out what you like. Sometimes it's often an amalgamation.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Casey. Do we have any other questions before we move on? Okay. I'm going to move us over to the feedback form. So I want you to go ahead and scan this feedback form to enter our raffle. And today we have a really, really cool raffle. Google has invited 8 of our members to come on a campus visit to the Google San Jose campus, where they'll do a free lunch, workshop, charter a bus from campus to Google and back, Google swag. You get to meet a bunch of cool people there. That's going to be Thursday, the 26th from 10:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. There is a question on the feedback form that indicates whether you are or are not available for that. If you'd like to be entered into the raffle, please press yes, but please also ensure that you are able to come if picked, because we do have very limited spots. We don't want people who have conflicts canceling last minute. So only enter the raffle if you are confirmed that you are able to go at that time. And so we'll give you guys a few minutes to fill that out. Whether or not you can attend, please fill out the feedback form. They're very helpful for us. And in a couple minutes, around 6:30, we will go and pick our winners. So stay tuned for that. Stick around. If you leave before the winners are picked and you're picked, we'll pick someone new. So definitely stick around for that. We'll give you guys a few minutes to fill that out, and then we will do the raffle. All right. And thank you again, Casey. A little big round of applause. Really, really appreciate you coming down. Okay. Yeah. We can send out all of Casey's contact information on the Discord. Yeah. Come up, say hi, introduce yourself. Yeah, and if anyone has questions right now, as you're filling out the feedback form, feel free to ask. Just a little bit like self.
And it kept refreshing. I was like,
Yeah.